The day I was thrown out onto the street, my sister-in-law smiled. I still remember the biting cold of that day. My suitcase was tossed onto the steps, and the slam of the door echoed like a final verdict. In that moment, I saw my sister-in-law standing in the doorway, her lips curling into a smirk. A smirk I swore I would never forget, and one I promised myself I would one day wipe away with my own success. Have you ever been treated like a stranger in your own family? I have. My childhood was a series of birthday parties with sparkling candles for my older brother, while I sat huddled in a corner with a tiny cake, too small for all my birthday candles. The sound of cheerful laughter often drifted from the living room, mixed with the smell of delicious food I was never allowed to touch. The only person I had was my grandmother, who would secretly slip a few crumpled dollar bills into my hand and whisper that I deserved so much more love. My parents never hid their favoritism. My brother was their pride and joy. I was just a shadow, out of place. They always told the neighbors how smart and talented he was. As for me, they'd just shrug and say I was a burden. I had gotten used to being left behind. Until my sister-in-law stepped into our home. When she first married into the family, she was as sweet as honey. A radiant smile, a gentle voice. Everyone believed she was perfect, but not me. I saw a cold glint in her eyes, like a dagger hidden beneath silk. And I was right. From the day she arrived, my already fragile place in the family vanished completely. There were nights I'd sit on the dark staircase, listening to them laugh and talk in the living room. The clinking of glasses, the sound of chairs scooting closer, my sister-in-law's cheerful chatter, as if she were the heart of the home. As for me, all I could hear was the frantic, choked beat of my own heart. I was no longer part of that picture. What would you do if your own home no longer had a place for you? When your very existence was an inconvenience to others? I thought their indifference was the worst it could get. But I had no idea that was only the beginning. Because my sister-in-law didn't just want me to be an outcast. She wanted to destroy me. I began to see my sister-in-law's true colors just a few months after the wedding. When she first arrived, she played the part of the perfect American wife, flawlessly. She'd chat sweetly with the neighbors, bake apple pies for the church bake sale, and call my parents Mom and Dad in a voice as sweet as syrup. On the surface, everyone praised her for being so charming and graceful. But to me, there was something fake in her eyes from the very beginning. Behind that dazzling smile, I saw a cold sharpness, like a kitchen knife hidden in a drawer. Then, one autumn afternoon, she made her first move. I had just come home from school, still smelling of the gym and with my backpack slung over my shoulder, when I heard my mother's frantic voice call from downstairs. When I got to the living room, the whole family was already waiting. There, on the oak dining table, amidst the steaming coffee cups, lay a gleaming silver bracelet. My mother pointed a finger at it, her voice thick with accusation. "Why was this in your room?" I was speechless. I had never touched that bracelet. But before I could even try to explain, my sister-in-law clutched her chest and let out a dramatic sigh. She claimed the bracelet had been missing for days, and strangely enough, it had just been found in my desk drawer. I cried out that I didn't do it, but my father just sat there, arms crossed, his eyes like ice. Then, his hand slammed down on the table like a gavel. The sound reverberated in my chest, making me tremble. I scanned the room for a single person who might believe me, but all I saw was my mother's tear-filled eyes looking at me with disappointment, and a flash of triumph in my sister-in-law's gaze. Not long after, it was about money. One Sunday morning, as the sun streamed through the church windows, I'd barely taken off my coat when I heard my mother shriek. The cash from my sister-in-law's wallet was gone. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. And, as if on cue, all eyes turned to me. My sister-in-law shook her head, her voice trembling as if she were about to cry, saying she didn't want to make a scene, but she had to be honest to preserve the family's integrity. I saw the corner of her mouth twitch into a tiny smirk, so fast that no one else would have noticed. But I saw it. It was the smile of someone who knew they had already won. I had a part-time job at a bakery near my school. I woke up at 5 a.m. for the opening shift, and my hands often smelled of butter and sugar until late in the afternoon. I never asked them for a single dollar. Yet here I was, being turned into a thief in my own home. Every time I left the house, I could feel the neighbors looking at me differently, as if I'd been branded the delinquent daughter. Then it started with my friends at school. I'd hear whispers in the hallways, that I was leeching off my brother, that I was draining my family dry. A close friend who used to get pizza with me after school now just gave me a strained smile before quickly turning away. In a small suburban town outside Chicago, gossip spreads like wildfire. And I knew exactly who started those fires. My sister-in-law would often invite the neighbors for coffee or join the women's group at church, always sighing and complaining about her lazy sister-in-law. And from her lips, her words became truth in everyone else's eyes. One day, I came home from my shift, my hands still smelling of freshly baked pastries, and heard my sister-in-law's mocking laugh from the living room. I stood on the stairs and listened as she told someone on the phone that all I did was ask for money, that I was ungrateful and never helped around the house. I stood there, a burning rage searing through my chest. When I walked into the room, she shot me a cold look, as if to say, "Go ahead and argue. No one will believe you." And so, the small attacks slowly grew into bigger ones. One evening, my parents were out at a party, leaving just me and my sister-in-law at home. I was in my room when I heard a rustling sound in the hallway. I opened the door to find her rummaging through my backpack. I yelled, asking what she was doing. She just smirked and said I was being paranoid. But the very next morning, my mother found a pack of cigarettes in my backpack. I had never smoked a single cigarette in my life. This time, my sister-in-law just stood there silently, her lips pressed into a thin line, letting me struggle alone in my anger. And just like every other time, they believed her. Can you imagine? Here in this country, where people talk about justice, where students are taught that truth will always prevail, I was being crushed by lies within my own family. I had no right to be heard, no right to a defense. I felt like I was being sentenced in a trial without a lawyer, without any evidence, only a web of cleverly crafted lies. Every night, I'd lie in my small upstairs room as the streetlight cast cold yellow bars across the wall. Downstairs, the TV would be murmuring, my father's voice calling a football game, punctuated by my sister-in-law's high-pitched laughter. I would lie there, eyes wide open, feeling the whole house vibrate with the sound of her laughter. Each sound was a knife twisting deeper into my heart. I knew it in my bones. She wasn't going to stop. She didn't just want me to suffer. She wanted me to disappear. What would you do when your enemy wears the face of family, with everyone else standing on their side? I used to think the earlier accusations were the worst she could do. I was wrong. It was all just a prelude to a sentence she had been writing for a long time. And I, like a blindfolded fool, kept hoping that one day the truth would save me. But the truth didn't come in time. One Monday morning, I left for school early. When I came back, my room had been torn apart. Clothes were thrown from the closet, drawers were pulled out, and books were scattered across the floor. In the middle of this chaos was my brother's laptop, sitting right on my bed, the screen still glowing with flashy online gambling sites. I froze. I never touched my brother's things, let alone something like that. Before I could even think, I heard heavy footsteps on the stairs, the sound of shoes pounding on the wood like war drums. My father burst in, his face red and his eyes blazing. He screamed that I had disgraced the family name, that I had stolen my brother's laptop for gambling. Before I could get a word out, my sister-in-law appeared behind him, her arms crossed, her gaze cold. She didn't say much, just gave a slight shake of her head, letting my father unleash all his fury on me. I swore I didn't do it, but my words fell into a void. The smoke from my father's cigarette stung my eyes. I wanted to scream, to cry, but my throat was tight, as if an invisible hand was squeezing it shut. Less than a week later, it got even worse. A bottle of painkillers appeared in my desk drawer. Instantly, my family branded me a drug addict. I tried to explain that I'd never touched them, but the verdict was already in. My mother burst into tears, saying she didn't recognize her own daughter anymore. My father coldly told me I was heading down a path of ruin. My brother was silent, refusing to even look at me, while my sister-in-law stood behind them, pretending to wipe away tears. I trembled, my palms slick with cold sweat, a heavy weight pressing on my chest. I didn't know what to say anymore. My words were worthless. I looked at their faces and knew, in their eyes, I had become a lost cause. And then, the day finally came. It was a Friday night. As darkness fell over the quiet suburban street, the family gathered in the living room. The ceiling fan creaked overhead, casting long, distorted shadows on the walls. I sat on the edge of my chair, my hands clenched so tight they were bleeding, my heart pounding so loudly I could hear every beat. My father said he couldn't let me live under his roof any longer. He called me a disgrace, a burden. My mother sobbed, but her tears weren't tea for me. They were for the perfect family image she believed I had shattered. My brother crossed his arms, his face blank. And my sister-in-law? She sat silently, but her eyes were gleaming, savoring every moment. I broke down, begging them to believe me, telling them it was all a setup. But my voice was broken, lost in the chilling silence of the room. My father shot up from his chair, the sound of it scraping against the floor. He grabbed my suitcase and threw it out the door like it was trash. The thud echoed in the quiet night. I scrambled after him, clinging to his legs, crying and pleading. He shoved me away, his hand as cold as steel. He said someone like me didn't deserve to be in this house for another minute. I stood frozen on the porch, surrounded by the cold night air and the chirping of insects that sounded like mockery. My suitcase lay at the bottom of the steps, a few clothes spilling out onto the dirty ground. The door slammed shut behind me with a deafening crack, severing all hope. But just before it closed, I saw her, my sister-in-law, standing in the frame, a smirk playing on her lips. A smirk I swore to burn into my memory, so that one day I could pay her back in full, with interest. Only my grandmother came for me. When her old Ford pulled up to the curb, I felt like I was gasping for my last breath. She wrapped her arms around me, her hands trembling but firm. She told me that I was safe now, that she believed me. The faint scent of her perfume mixed with my tears, creating a fragrance that was both sweet and bitter. On the drive away, I looked out the car window and watched the streetlights fade into the distance, as if I were leaving a part of my childhood behind forever. I knew in that moment, I no longer had a family. What would you do if you were thrown out by your own parents, and the person behind it all was the sister-in-law who once promised to bring happiness to your family? I left that house on a night so cold my skin felt raw. On the back seat of my grandmother's old Ford, my small suitcase rattled around, holding nothing but a few changes of clothes and some books. I sat in silence, watching my breath fog up the window. The streetlights receded behind us one by one, as if I were leaving an entire lifetime of rejection behind. My grandmother barely spoke. Every now and then she'd place her trembling but steady hand on mine and whisper that I was going to be okay. Her raspy voice, the faint scent of mint from her pocket. It was the only thing that kept me from falling apart. A vast emptiness filled my heart. I had no idea what the future held, only that my own parents had just cast me out like a stranger. My grandmother lived in a quiet suburb west of Chicago, in a small brick house with a front porch full of yellow chrysanthemums. That first night, I slept on an old bed in the living room. The mattress sagged and creaked with every move I made. The light from the street lamp filtered through the lace curtains, painting pale yellow stripes on the floor. I lay there as tears soaked my pillow. But this time, they weren't the bitter tears of despair. They were softer, as if I had finally found a safe place to cry. During the day, I helped her in the garden, picked vegetables and swept the porch. The smell of damp earth, the chirping of sparrows on the white fence. It all felt like a kind of therapy. She told me I didn't have to do anything, that I should just rest. But I couldn't live on pity. I needed to prove that I wasn't the failure they had branded me. I got a job at the bakery near my old high school. It started at 5 a.m. Every morning, when the alarm shrieked in the pitch dark, I would shiver from the cold but force myself to get up. The small shop was filled with the warm scent of dough and butter, and the heat from the ovens would sting my eyes. I wiped tables, arranged pastries, and cleaned trays. The pay was meager, but it was the first money I had ever earned with my own two hands. Regular customers started to recognize me. An old woman who always bought whole wheat bread would compliment me on how quick I was. A police officer on the night shift would sometimes ask what school I went to while grabbing his coffee. Those small words of praise were like gold to me. They reminded me that I could exist as a person of value, not a freeloader, not a burden. I continued with my studies. I was quieter in class than before, but a small fire burned in my heart. I would not let them win. I joined the writing club and submitted short essays to the school magazine. One of my pieces, about injustice within a family, was chosen for publication. Seeing my name in print made me tremble with a mix of joy and fear. I knew my parents would never read it, but to me, it was proof that I was not invisible. I made new friends from other classes, kids who also came from imperfect families. We'd sit together in the library, talking about movies and our dreams. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders when I realized I wasn't the only one who was broken. The world was so much bigger than the house that had thrown me out. When I received my acceptance letter to a community college, I cried. Tears fell onto the black and white paper, blurring the name of the school. My grandmother held me tight, whispering that she always knew I could do it. The first day I stepped onto campus, I saw the American flag waving against a bright blue sky and heard the cheerful chatter of students. My heart thrilled as if I had entered a different world. Here, nobody knew my past. No one compared me to my brother. No one believed my sister-in-law's lies. I was free, truly free. I enrolled in a creative writing class, submitting long essays about my life. My professor, a kind, silver-haired man, told me I had a sharp pen. It was the first time in my life an adult had told me I had talent. Those words were like a resurrection. To make extra money, I started looking for freelance writing gigs online. At first, it was just small blog posts and a few lines of ad copy, jobs that paid only a few dollars. But I poured my heart into every word. I'd write in my cramped dorm room under the pale yellow light of my desk lamp, my hands aching with exhaustion, but my heart was on fire. Slowly, I started getting steady clients. A small brand hired me to write their ad copy. Then a bigger company reached out. I built my portfolio and started getting positive reviews. Each email of praise, each new contract, was like another brick I was laying to rebuild my life. I didn't need my parents' money or their approval. I was supporting myself. I started to travel with the money I earned. The first time I flew out of Illinois, I sat by the plane window looking down at the endless blanket of white clouds. I started to cry, but these were tears of freedom. I stood on a beach in California, listening to the waves crash against the shore, breathing in the salty air, and I could feel myself starting to heal. Whenever I had the time, I'd go back to my grandmother's house. We'd sit on her porch while she sipped her tea, and I'd tell her about my new clients. The wind would carry the scent of chrysanthemums into the small yard. I knew that even if the whole world turned its back on me, I still had her. She was the only family I needed, but every time I thought back to my sister-in-law's smirk on the night I was thrown out, my blood would boil. I had been weak, looked down upon, buried in lies. But now, I was standing on my own 2 feet. I made a promise to myself. I wouldn't just survive. I would thrive, so brightly that her triumphant smirk would turn to ash in my memory. What about you? Would you let go of the past? Or would you do what I did? Nurture it in your heart like a flame, until the day you could turn it into your most powerful weapon. I thought I could leave the past behind me. I thought that if I just focused on my work, on writing and building my career and living my own life, the ghosts of the past would fade away. But I was wrong. The past doesn't just disappear, it lies in wait for the right moment to come back and knock on your door. And this time, it knocked with my mother's voice. One afternoon, just after I'd sent a draft to a major client, my phone rang. The screen showed 6 missed calls from the same number. I recognized it immediately. It was my mother's. My heart clenched, as if someone had just poured ice water over my chest. After all these years of silence, why was she calling now? I hesitated for a long time before finally answering. Her voice came through, trembling, but coated in a sugary sweetness. She said she'd seen me on TV, that she was so proud. I could hear the distance in every word. It was as if she were reading from a pre-written script, not speaking from a mother's heart. Then, my father's voice cut in from the background. He didn't beat around the bush. He asked how much I was making, saying I must have a lot of money now. Immediately after, they both started complaining about the old house falling into disrepair, the leaking roof, and the expenses they couldn't afford. They insisted that now that I was successful, I had a responsibility to my parents, that it was my duty to support them. I sat there, stunned. So, after everything, the only reason they reached out was for money. Not a single word about the night they threw my suitcase out the door. Not a hint of remorse. Just need and demands. Soon after, a text from my sister-in-law lit up my phone. Her tone was sickeningly sweet. She complimented me on how much I matured and said she was so happy to see me succeed. But a few lines later, her true motive was revealed. She said my brother was unemployed, that the family was struggling, and that I should lend them a significant amount of money for a new business venture. I read her words, a fire burning inside me. I remembered her smirking that night as the door slammed shut behind me. And now, this same person was texting me as if we were loving sisters. The next message was even more shameless. She reminded me that family is supposed to help each other, that since I was well off, I shouldn't let them suffer. I almost laughed out loud. Family? If this was a family, I wouldn't have had to grow up under my grandmother's roof. A week later, my parents asked to meet in person. I agreed, because I wanted to hear it for myself. We met at a small coffee shop downtown. As I walked in, the whir of the grinder filled the air, and the rich scent of roasted coffee hit me. They were already there, with my sister-in-law sitting beside them, swirling a latte, a half smile on her face as if she already knew the outcome. My mother began by detailing their financial struggles, emphasizing that we were blood, and that once I found success, I needed to remember my responsibilities. Her voice trembled, as if every word was heavy, but it sounded more like a performance than genuine emotion. My father was more direct, saying the roof was failing, they couldn't manage on their own, and that all their years of raising me had to be repaid, with money. I sat there, listening to every word, feeling as if stones were being piled on my chest. Not one of them mentioned the sins of the past. Not a single breath was wasted on regret. It was all about their needs, and their belief that I owed them a debt. Throughout the entire conversation, my sister-in-law barely said a thing. She would just nod occasionally, her eyes fixed on me, as if waiting for me to show a sign of weakness. Her silence was more terrifying than their accusations. It was a silent confirmation that everything was still going according to her plan. When they finally stopped talking, I put my coffee cup down. I tapped my finger against the ceramic, a steady rhythm like a fateful knock on a door. I told them I wouldn't give them a single cent. I made it clear that if they wanted my help, they had to publicly admit the truth, that I had been framed, that my sister-in-law had orchestrated everything, and that they had been wrong to throw me out. The air went still. I saw my father's face flush, my mother begin to tremble, and my sister-in-law grip her cup so tightly her knuckles turned white. They tried to argue that there was no need to bring up old history, that the past should be left in the past. But I shook my head. Without a public admission, there would be no help from me. I stood up, the legs of my chair screeching against the tile floor, and left them sitting in a heavy, suffocating silence. In the days that followed, my phone was flooded with messages. My father sent accusatory texts, calling me ungrateful. My mother wrote that I was cold-hearted, that I'd forgotten everything she'd done for me. My sister-in-law sent a long email that ended with a warning. I would regret this. I read every single message, and then a strange feeling of lightness washed over me. For the first time, I had set a boundary. For the first time, I had looked them in the eye without fear. I knew I had chosen my path. What would you do if the very people who threw you out came back, hands outstretched, demanding money without ever admitting they were wrong? Would you give in for the sake of a fake family? Or would you be like me, willing to lose everything rather than trade justice for a lie? I left that coffee shop with a strange sense of calm. The anger was still simmering, but it was mixed with a cold resolve. I was no longer the little girl begging to be believed. I was the one making the rules. And in that moment, I knew I wasn't going to stop at just saying no. I was going to do much more. One evening, as the sunset lingered on the high-rise buildings, I received a long text message from my sister-in-law. She wrote that I was ungrateful, that I owed the family, and that I would regret turning my back on them. Every word felt as heavy as lead. But at the end of the message, she accidentally revealed what I had been waiting for. A half-hearted admission that there might have been some misunderstandings back then, and that perhaps their handling of the situation had been a little unfair. I read it, and my lips curled into the same smirk she had given me all those years ago. This was it, the crack in her story. She could try to spin it however she wanted, but once a sliver of the truth was out, I could pry open the door to the past she had tried so hard to keep sealed shut. I spent the whole night thinking. The glow of my laptop screen illuminated my face. My eyes burned, but my mind had never been clearer. I decided to write an email to our entire extended family, all the people who had listened to my sister-in-law's lies and turned their backs on me years ago. I would include every piece of evidence, the text messages, the notes I had kept, and even her half-hearted admission. In the email, I recounted the years of false accusations. I described how my sister-in-law had set me up, how my parents had believed her lies, and how I had been thrown out onto the street. I didn't want their pity. I just wanted the truth to be exposed. I wanted everyone to see clearly who the real victim was and who the real villain was. When I hit send, my heart pounded like a drum. But instead of fear, I felt a wave of relief. It was as if I had finally set down a burden I had carried my entire childhood. The response was faster than I could have imagined. Just one day later, I got a call from an aunt. Her voice was filled with rage, but this time, it wasn't directed at me. She said she was shocked to learn the truth, that she couldn't believe my parents would do that to their own daughter. More calls poured in, a cousin expressing his sympathy, an uncle admitting his surprise at having been deceived for so many years. Meanwhile, my parents and sister-in-law didn't stay quiet. They started sending long, desperate messages, begging me to retract the email, claiming I was destroying the family's reputation. But to me, the truth isn't slander. The truth is a light, and light always makes those who are used to living in darkness squint. A few days later, there was a family gathering. I hadn't planned on going, but a part of me needed to see it with my own eyes. When I walked into the room filled with my relatives, the air was thick, like the calm before a storm. All eyes turned to me, but this time, there was no contempt in their gazes. I saw sympathy, curiosity, and even shame as they remembered how they had once shunned me. My parents sat in a corner, their faces gaunt, while my sister-in-law stood behind them, her expression rigid. They tried to argue that I was making things up, that I was just out for revenge. But no one was buying it anymore. Our relatives started questioning them, challenging them, demanding explanations. And the most damning evidence was my sister-in-law's own fumbling, her faltering voice. I stood there and listened. My heart was beating fast, but this time, it was the rhythm of victory. I didn't have to raise my voice. The truth was speaking for itself. When the chaos reached its peak, I stated my condition one last time. I said that I would never help them, never forgive them, unless they stood up in front of everyone and admitted what they had done. I wasn't demanding an apology for myself. I was demanding a public acknowledgement so the truth would be set in stone. No one answered. My parents hung their heads in silence. My sister-in-law avoided my gaze, her lips trembling. I knew then that they would never admit it, but I also knew that I didn't need them to. I had already won, not with money, but with the truth. That night, I went back to my apartment and opened the window, letting the night air rush in. The city below was a brilliant tapestry of lights, with cars moving in a ceaseless flow. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with fresh air. For the first time, I felt like the past no longer had a hold on me. They wanted me to break. They wanted me to be silent. But I had dared to fight back. I had proven that even the weakest person can rise up as long as they hold on to the truth. What would you do? Would you stay silent just to keep the peace? Or would you choose to do as I did, turn the truth into a weapon, and watch as the people who once laughed at your pain are forced to bow their heads in the light of justice? I once thought that the public confrontation was the end, that after the family meeting, everything would finally settle down. But the story wasn't over. After a great storm, there are always aftershocks. And for me, those aftershocks became the final proof that I had chosen the right path. Not long after the meeting, I received a series of long text messages from my sister-in-law. They filled my phone screen in the dead of night, word after word, like a downpour. In them, she continued to blame me, calling me heartless for airing our family's private matters. But then, in a brief moment of weakness, she let slip the words I had been waiting years to hear, an admission that some things had been exaggerated and that the way they treated me might have been a bit harsh. I read the words over and over, feeling a cool breeze wash over my chest. Even though it was a half-hearted confession, it was clear proof that I had not been lying. I saved those messages, like an indelible ink stain in the journal of my own justice. The emails I sent to my relatives had set off a chain reaction. Many of them began to confront my parents. One of my aunts told me she was ashamed for having believed the rumors all those years ago. An uncle decided to stop attending family gatherings because he no longer wanted to associate with liars. Meanwhile, my parents desperately tried to cling to their self-made image as victims. They told anyone who would still listen that I had changed, that success had gone to my head. But the more they talked, the weaker they looked. Because this time, they didn't have the unanimous support of the family. I heard that at a recent party, my father flew into a rage when someone brought up the story of me being thrown out, and my mother burst into tears at the dinner table. They had become the center of suspicion, no longer the self-sacrificing parental figures they had pretended to be. Then one day, I received an email from my lawyer. He informed me that my family had been issued a formal warning after continuing to harass me with messages, calls, and the spreading of false information. A cease and desist letter was sent directly to their house. When I held the copy in my hands, I sat in silence for hours. The black ink on the white paper, the firm, legal language. It felt like a final seal closing a long chapter of my life. The girl who was thrown out onto the street had become the person who could legally compel them to be silent. Justice, at long last, was on my side. As time went on, I continued to build my career. I was invited to speak at conferences, sharing my experience as a story of resilience and the power of standing up against adversity. I appeared on podcasts and local television, talking about finding justice even when you're betrayed by your own family. Each time I told my story, I no longer trembled. I felt stronger. I still visited my grandmother often. We would sit on her porch, watching the yellow chrysanthemums sway in the breeze. She'd smile and tell me that I had gone further than she had ever dared to dream for me. I'd look at her thin, trembling hands and see with perfect clarity that she was, and always had been, my true family. I started going to therapy, talking through the pain I had kept locked in my heart for so many years. Every session, sitting in that bright room, listening to the soft scratching of the therapist's pencil on a notepad, I felt another layer of chains fall away. I was learning to separate the past from the present, to separate them from me. One evening, when I came home to my small apartment, I looked in the mirror and saw a different face staring back. It was no longer the desperate girl who had been cast out of her home. I saw a free, confident woman who would face down the entire world if she had to. And I smiled, a smile completely different from my sister-in-law's triumphant smirk all those years ago. This was the smile of liberation. That family no longer contacts me. Most of our relatives know the truth. And I continue on my own path. Sometimes, in the quiet of the night, I can still hear the echo of the door slamming, the sound of my sister-in-law's laughter. But now, those sounds no longer make me tremble. They just remind me of how far I've come. What would you do? Would you choose to go back and forgive? Or would you do as I have, carve out your own path, keep the past as a lesson learned, and walk forward on steady feet? I know that everyone has their own story when it comes to family. Sometimes they're filled with warmth, and other times with wounds that never quite heal. I've shared my story, and now I'd like to hear yours. If you've ever felt misunderstood, been betrayed, or had to fight for your own justice, please leave a comment below. I will read every single one. You never know. Your experience might be the flame that gives strength to someone who needs it most.